In this video, we're reviewing Eddington and getting to the bottom of conspiracies by getting to the bottom of a mezcal and apple cocktail called the 6 Foot Standoff. Today, on the Martini Shot. Hello and welcome to the Martini Shot, the home of movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails. Before we get into the review, let's whip ourselves up a drink. So this cocktail is going to pull a bit from the film's New Mexico setting with a riff on the cocktail called the Chimeo, which was created in the state back in the 1960s by Arturo Jaramillo. Instead of tequila, I'm going to be incorporating mezcal, as the smokiness kind of reminds me of whiskey, which pairs quite well with apple flavors. It's also going to have a little bit of Angostura to spice it up a bit and round the whole thing out. You may now lower your face masks to take a sip, but not for too long now, you hear? Let's get into it. All right, this will be a shaken cocktail, so go ahead and grab a shaker. First, we're going to be starting with a little bit of fresh lemon juice at ½ an ounce. 1 ounce of apple juice. And now for our alcoholic ingredients. First, we're going to be starting with some creme de cassis, which is a blackcurrant liqueur. And all you're going to need is a 1/4 ounce. And now for our main spirit, 1½ ounces of mezcal. And finally, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Throw some ice in that shaker and shake until chilled. Once you're done, go ahead and strain your cocktail into a coupe glass. And then finally, you can go ahead and garnish it with a few apple slices. And there you go, now you have the 6 Foot Standoff. It's this really nice combination between a refreshing summer drink and something more akin to what you would maybe drink in the fall. The apple and the lemon is very, very bright, very tart, but the smokiness of that mezcal and the more Christmassy spices that you get from those Angostura bitters kind of makes it feel a little bit bolder. Super crisp, as you'd probably expect. Kind of delves a little bit into sour territory a little bit, but I love, love, love that blend of those fruit flavors with the smokiness of that mezcal, the very, very small tinge of spice from the Angostura. Incredibly delicious. Because of how tart it is, it kind of gets your mouth salivating a little bit, which is a really nice touch. And the creme de cassis is so subtle, but you can kind of taste it on the back end. You get that nice, kind of heavier, sweet, almost kind of like a dessert sweet. And that creme de cassis is a little bit subtle, but you can definitely taste it a bit more on the back end. You get kind of that heavier sweetness, kind of like a desserty sweetness. It gives this cocktail a really cool complexion that I'm a big fan of. And of course, any cocktail that comes with a little snack is a win in my book. Now that we have our drink, let's get right into the review. When you're stressed out, what do? Some of us go to therapy, meditate, work out, drink. I'm guilty of at least one of those. But not my man Ari Aster. When he's stressed, he goes out and makes a movie about it. Aster has been around for a minute now, bursting onto the scene with Hereditary, a film I attribute to my rejuvenation on the horror genre, and following it up with another standout horror film in Midsommar. From there, Aster decided to go in a more psychological direction with Beau is Afraid, a nutty, excessive odyssey that added uncomfortable humor and warped reality into his toolbox. There's clearly a lot of mental anguish not only in himself, but in the world that he wants to dissect and lampoon. Which brings us to Eddington. It's a modern western set during the 2020 pandemic that aims to capture the global psychosis that came with our worldviews being challenged and the entire world being driven inside. It's a time of divided opinions and warring politics that I'm sure most people want to forget. But as Aster suggests, we can't, because this isn't just our past, it's also our present. Eddington is bound to make a lot of people mad, potentially from both sides of the aisle. His scathing reflection of things like conspiracy theorists and performative activists is bound to divide audiences. And while I understand those sentiments, I think there's a lot more to this than a simple both sides bad argument. For one, it's a very entertaining Western thriller, sprinkled with corruption, murder, and betrayal. Everything is acted out and presented in a highly engaging manner, but when we get into the bigger picture talks is where this thing gets dicey. A lot of talking points have sprouted out of the pandemic, and Aster does his darndest to tackle all of them. This leaves the deeper meaning of the film as a bit of a mess, but not one that can't be pieced together to see the intention. I really enjoyed my time watching this, and I'm gonna do my best to interpret what I think is at the center of all of this. Guess I better take my shoes off with all the walking on eggshells I'm about to do. On the surface, it's the story of a sheriff frustrated with things like mask mandates and lockdowns, who decides to run for mayor of his little New Mexico town. But this is also much more of a personal battle, as his opponent, the current mayor, has a questionable past with the sheriff's wife, something he has resented him over despite not fully understanding. As the sheriff fights to win, the implosion of the BLM protests throws the town into a frenzy he's unable to contain, and as his life begins to unravel, there's nowhere left to go but down. Way down. Ari Aster may have found his Scorsese-DiCaprio pairing with Joaquin Phoenix because he just knows how to pull out some of the most pathetic, neurotic performances of all time with him. Phoenix's Sheriff Joe Cross is a further dissection of masculinity seen in Beau is Afraid, only this time replacing fear with anger. Joe isn't exactly on the greatest of standings with his wife, his mother-in-law, or his town, and the rolling out of pandemic mandates is only making things worse. Despite his role as sheriff, Joe is in a crisis of purpose that he decides to tackle in ways that go from petty to destructive very quickly. I think this is a reflection on law enforcement and how there are moments where they act on emotion rather than reason, which can lead to dire consequences. The film does kind of sympathize with why these moments happen, which ultimately does give layers to this character. He's not entirely a bad guy, but he lets his personal issues get the better of him while in a position where you can't afford that to happen. Phoenix is the crux of this film and is phenomenal, but some of the other prominent performances do feel like a little bit of a wasted opportunity. Pedro Pascal's Mayor Garcia is a super solid, grounded foil for Joe, who shows hints of his own seedy side, but the film never really gets too deep into that. Then there's Austin Butler, who plays a fanatical cult leader that almost kinda exists in his own little story in the background. Butler is as solid as ever, but the character doesn't feel completely attached to the story. He definitely is from a thematic side, but his impact isn't nearly as big as I would have hoped, especially because he connects to Joe's wife Louise, played by Emma Stone. Another super solid actor that doesn't really feel like they were used to their fullest potential, ending up as blips in the story, pivotal to select moments, but not always the narrative as a whole. If you're hesitant to watch this because of its surface level label as a COVID movie, it's not really about that. It's not like The Bubble, which used the pandemic as a launch pad for bad jokes about nose swabs and standing 6 feet apart. Rather, it's a bit more like Stress Positions, which uses the pandemic as set dressing to explore the emotional and mental toll something like this has on a population. Nowhere is that clearer than with the film's take on social media, which is genuinely one of the most authentic and well-in-tuned uses of this plot point I think I've ever seen. That and the internet became such an integral part of that time period as people relied on it to communicate and give their opinions, which of course, sparks a mass outpouring of conspiracy theories and heavy emotions driven by our need to make sense of the most confusing time in our lives. Joe is perhaps the embodiment of that, going from being upset over mask mandates to running for mayor to making egregious, unverified accusations all within the span of what feels like 2 days. While he tries to block out the constant outpour of conspiracy theories spouted by his mother-in-law, he ends up engaging in those same practices in real life. This also spirals into things like racial tensions with his single black deputy, which is played for laughs at first before things start to get very real. But while the film pokes fun at the aggressive, sometimes reality-defiant nature of one side of the aisle, it also targets activism, both of the genuine and misplaced variety, perhaps even more. There's a subplot involving two boys getting involved in BLM protests purely to win the favor of a girl they like, showing the performative hollowness that can come from trying to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And I get where people feel like some of this commentary is a bit out of touch, and I'll be honest, I did kind of agree at first. While the film feels like it has way more to say about teens blindly protesting violence rather than the violence that sparked it, I really don't think that's the case. I think there are some truths that hit close to home, but I couldn't help but keep thinking back to Beau is Afraid while watching this. That film is drowning in absurdity, and the film is not afraid to let you know that. It's unreal and bizarre, and there's a freaking giant penis monster in it, for God's sake. For Eddington, I don't think Aster left that absurdist realm. He's only made it more subtle. The way I view this film is that it's almost a parody of typically right-wing style of stories told through the lens of Joe, who reflects how Aster actually views that ideology, driven by unprocessed emotions and confusion that turns into anger. I mean, it's a story about a small town sheriff trying to protect his town from an invading ideology, which is manifested into a heavy artillery shootout with an Antifa-inspired threat. And yet Joe is bumbling, trigger-happy, and willing to do bad things to protect his own skin. It's surrounded by the exact parodies the right likes to make, with a parody of the right in the center. Viewing this through more of an absurdist lens like Beau is Afraid doesn't remove the commentary it's trying to make, but it does do a better job to contextualize it. Sure, maybe it could have been more direct and simple, but we don't keep talking about the direct and simple films after they're done, do we? That's at least how I view it. I know people are gonna be pissed about it one way or another, but I'm just glad to have gotten a hell of a modern Western. Eddington uses an uncomfortable turning point in our lives to create a darkly funny yet incredibly depressing reflection of the societal regression we found ourselves in. The way it frames the internet as the looking glass into our collective insanities is quite poignant, finding a very impactful way to reaffirm what we probably already know. The finger pointing can feel misguided at times, and it may not hold the definitive answer to fixing this mess like some may hope, but it's still a hell of a film at its heart. It reminds us of our own fallibility as humans, but if we've already made it a few thousand years, I feel like we can make it a few thousand more. Please, I'm begging y'all. Let us live long enough, at least until I can see that third Spider-Verse movie. For my rating, I'm giving this film 4 shell casings out of 5. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Martini Shot. If you saw Eddington, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. If you like what you saw here and would like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me across all social media channels. Those links are down in the description below. And if you enjoy movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails, be sure to check out my website, martinishot.blog. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly.